The blizzard howled like a dying wolf, tearing through the jagged peaks of the Sierra Nevada mountains. It was Christmas Eve, 1885, but for Julian Thorne, the holiday meant nothing more than another night of survival in the unforgiving high country. The storm had buried the passes, turning the world into a blinding sheet of white violence. Thorne sat by his hearth, the fire crackling weakly against the encroaching frost, cleaning the action of his Colt Navy revolver. He was a man whose reputation was etched in lead and gunpowder, a gunslinger who had walked away from the wars of men to find silence. But silence, he was learning, was a rare commodity on the frontier. What he found in his yard moments later defied all logic. Through the swirling snow, he spotted shapes that didn't belong in this desolate wilderness. Two figures lay collapsed near his woodpile, rapidly being buried by the drift. Thorne didn't hesitate. He threw on his heavy buffalo coat and plunged into the gale. When he reached them, the shock nearly froze him in place. They weren't rugged trappers or lost prospectors. They were women. Young, delicate, and completely ill-equipped for a winter that killed cattle in standing herds. They were Chinese, identical in every feature, their raven hair frozen with ice. Most shockingly, they were not dressed in furs or wool. Both wore identical light pink prairie dresses, garments made of fine cotton and lace, suited for a spring Sunday in San Francisco, not a blizzard in the Sierras. The fabric was torn and soaked, clinging to their shivering forms. The contrast of that soft, pale pink against the brutal white snow was a sight that twisted Thorne's stomach. He scooped them up, one in each arm. They were light, dangerously so, their skin burning with the paradoxical heat of severe hypothermia. He kicked his cabin door shut against the wind and laid them before the fire, stripping away the frozen layers of wet pink fabric to wrap them in thick wool blankets. For 3 hours, Thorne worked to keep them alive, rubbing circulation back into their limbs and feeding them warm broth. He was a killer by trade, but tonight he was a nursemaid. When the first woman opened her eyes, Thorne saw a terror that had nothing to do with the cold. She looked at him, then at her sister, her dark eyes wide and frantic. She grabbed Thorne's wrist with surprising strength. "Hide," she whispered, her English accented but clear. "Please." "They come." Thorne looked at the two women. Now that they were conscious, the resemblance was uncanny. They were mirror images of one another, possessed of a porcelain beauty that seemed almost supernatural in the flickering firelight. "Who is coming?" Thorne asked, his voice gravelly from disuse. "The tiger," the second sister whispered, clutching her blanket. "And our father." The story spilled out in fragmented, terrified bursts. Their names were Mai and Lin. They were the daughters of Master Chen, a man whose name was whispered with a mixture of reverence and fear from the rail yards of Sacramento to the opium dens of Deadwood. Chen was a tycoon of immense power, a man who moved mountains and men alike. But the tiger they spoke of was Silas Vane, a ruthless rail baron who had demanded a alliance with the Chen family. To seal the deal, Vane had demanded a bride. But Vane was a monster, known for breaking his wives. The twins, inseparable since birth, had overheard that Vane intended to take one and sell the other to the brothels of the Barbary Coast to ensure no familial loyalty could undermine him. Terrified, they had fled their father's traveling caravan 3 days ago, running into the teeth of the storm rather than face separation and slavery. They had run until the cold took their legs, collapsing on Thorne's land. "Helping us brings death," Mai said, her eyes locked on Thorne's. "Master Chen has trackers. Vane has killers. They will burn this cabin to get us." Thorne looked at his guns resting on the table. He looked at the window, where the snow battered the glass. He had spent 10 years running from his own demons, trying to avoid fights that weren't his. But looking at these two terrified women, shivering in his blankets, he felt the old iron settle in his gut. It was Christmas. And nobody was dying in his house tonight. "Let them come," Thorne muttered. The attack didn't wait for morning. An hour later, the sound of horses cut through the wind. Thorne blew out the lamp, plunging the cabin into darkness. He cracked the shutter. 5 riders. Not Chen's men, judging by their rough attire. These were hired guns, likely Vane's, looking to retrieve the property before the father could intervene. Marshals? Lynn asked, trembling. Mercenaries, Thorne corrected, checking the load in his Winchester. Stay down. A voice boomed from the darkness. We see the smoke, Thorne. We know you're in there. Send out the girls, and we leave you alive. Keep him, and we torch the place. Thorne didn't answer with words. He shattered the window pane with the barrel of his rifle and fired. The lead rider dropped from his saddle, screaming as he clutched his shoulder. The frontier exploded into chaos. Bullets chewed into the log walls, sending splinters flying. Thorne moved with the efficiency of a machine, firing, levering, and firing again. He wasn't shooting to scare, he was shooting to end it. Mai and Lin huddled in the corner, clutching each other. They had heard stories of the Western gunslingers, men who were more myth than flesh, but watching Thorne was like watching a storm contained in a human shape. He held the door for hours, repelling wave after wave of probing attacks. When the ammunition ran low, he switched to his revolvers. By the time the grey light of dawn began to bleed over the mountains, for men lay dead in the snow, their blood staining the pristine white. The fifth had fled. The storm had broken, leaving a silence so heavy it pressed against the ears. Thorne slumped against the wall, exhausted. He had a graze on his cheek and a bullet hole through his coat, but he was alive. Mai crawled toward him, tearing a strip from her petticoat to press against his bleeding cheek. Why? She asked softly. You do not know us. You came to my door, Thorne grunted, wincing as she cleaned the wound. That makes you my responsibility. Our father comes now, Lin said, staring out the window at the clearing sky. The gunfire will draw him. He is worse than the men you killed. Thorne reloaded his weapons. Then we wait. They didn't have to wait long. By mid-morning, the valley trembled with the sound of a massive party approaching. This wasn't a ragged band of mercenaries, this was a procession. Over the ridge came 20 riders, flanked by a pristine black carriage on sled runners. The men wore heavy coats of wolf fur and carried repeating rifles. They surrounded the cabin with military precision. The carriage door opened, and Master Chen stepped out. He was an older man, but he stood with a rigid, imperial posture. He wore a long silk robe beneath a heavy fur cloak, and his eyes were as cold and hard as obsidian. He surveyed the dead bodies in the yard with mild disinterest before fixing his gaze on the cabin door. Julian Thorne. Chen's voice was calm, carrying effortlessly across the yard. You have something that belongs to the house of Chen. Thorne kicked the door open and stepped out, his thumbs hooked in his gun belt. He left the girls inside. I have 2 guests, Thorne called back. They don't look like property to me. Chen walked forward, his boots crunching on the frozen crust. 2 bodyguards flanked him, hands on their weapons. My daughters were foolish to run. They have dishonored an agreement. They must return. They were running from a man who planned to sell one and break the other, Thorne said, his voice flat. I don't think they're going anywhere. Chen stopped 10 paces away. He studied Thorne, the blood on his face, the steady hands, the carnage in the yard. You killed Vane's men. That is inconvenient. But it also proves a point. You defended them. All night, Thorne said. And you asked for no payment. It's Christmas, Thorne said dryly. Call it a gift. Chen remained silent for a long time. The tension was palpable. The bodyguards were itching to draw, but Chen raised a hand, stopping them. He looked at the cabin window where the twin faces of Mai and Lin were pressed against the glass. Bring them out, Chen commanded. I wish to speak to them. Thorne nodded once. He signaled the girls. They emerged slowly, still wearing the blankets over their ruined pink dresses. They looked terrified, bowing their heads before their father. Father, Mai whispered. Please. Do not give us to Vane. Chen looked at his daughters, then back at Thorne. A strange look crossed his face, not anger, but calculation. He was a businessman, a survivor of wars in the East and the West. He saw the way his daughters stood near the gunslinger, not behind him like cowards, but beside him. He saw the way Thorn angled his body to shield them both. Vane is a problem, Chen admitted, his voice lowering so only they could hear. He has political power. Breaking the betrothal means war on my rails. He will claim I acted in bad faith. Unless... Chen trailed off, his eyes narrowing as he looked at Thorn. Unless what? Thorn asked. Unless the daughters are no longer mine to give, Chen said. By the laws of this territory, and by the traditions of my ancestors, a life debt changes ownership of destiny. You saved them from the storm. You saved them from Vane's killers. Their lives are technically yours. I don't want to own anyone, Thorn snapped. It is not about ownership, Mr. Thorn. It is about protection, Chen said. Vane will come back. He will bring the law, or he will bring an army. I cannot fight him openly without losing my railroad. But you are a ghost. You have no railroad to burn. Get to the point, Thorn growled. The shocking decision is this, Chen announced, turning to his men so they could bear witness. My daughters cannot be separated. Their souls are one. Vane wished to sever them. I will not allow it. Since you saved both, you are responsible for both. To break the contract with Vane legally, they must be married immediately. To a man who has earned the right by blood. Thorn blinked. Married? To which one? Chen smiled, a thin, sharp expression. You do not listen, Mr. Thorn. They are identical. They are one spirit in two bodies. You cannot marry one and leave the other to be preyed upon. You must marry both. Thorn stared at the man. That's illegal in this territory. The territory is vast, Chen waved a hand dismissively. And I have judges in my pocket who owe me more than they owe the governor. We will conduct a ceremony here, under the laws of my ancestors, and I will have the papers forged by morning to satisfy your American courts. You marry them, and they become untouchable. Vane cannot claim another man's wives without starting a blood feud that the law will not support. Mai and Lin looked at Thorn. The terror in their eyes had been replaced by a desperate hope. They stepped closer to him. He saved us, Lin said softly to her father. He fought for us when he owed us nothing. He is a warrior, Mai added. Better a warrior than a monster. Thorn looked at the twins. He looked at the snow-covered valley. He was a loner. A drifter. The idea of a wife was terrifying enough. The idea of two was insanity. But he looked at the pink dresses, tattered and stained, and remembered how small they had felt when he carried them out of the storm. If he said no, Chen would likely be forced by politics to hand them over to Vane, or they would be hunted down eventually. I have nothing to offer them, Thorn said quietly. Just a cabin and a gun. Safety is a rare dowry, Chen replied. And you will not be poor. The house of Chen pays its debts. You will manage the pass for my trains. You will be protected. Thorn looked at Mai. She reached out and took his left hand. Lin took his right. Their grips were firm. They weren't asking to be saved anymore, they were choosing their savior. I accept, Thorn said. The words felt heavy, like a sentence and a vow combined. Good, Chen clapped his hands. We do it now. Before Vane realizes his mercenaries are dead. The ceremony was unlike anything the Sierra Nevada had ever seen. There was no priest, only an elder from Chen's retinue who chanted in a low, rhythmic drone as incense sticks were burned in the snow. Thorn stood in his battered coat, the colt on his hip heavy and cold. Mai and Lin stood on either side of him. The blankets were discarded for a moment, revealing the ruined pink dresses, a testament to their survival. They bowed to the four directions. They bowed to the ancestors. And finally, they bowed to Thorn. Master Chen produced 2 rings of jade, slipping them onto Thorn's pinky fingers, as his hands were too large for them to fit elsewhere. You are family now, Chen said, his voice void of the earlier coldness. The tiger will come. But now he faces a dragon. Just as the ceremony concluded, movement caught Thorne's eye. On the ridge, a solitary figure on a massive black horse appeared. It was the sheriff, a man known to be in Vane's pocket. He rode down the slope, his badge glinting in the winter sun. "Stop this," the sheriff bellowed, pulling his horse up short as he saw the gathering. "I have a warrant for these women. Runaways and thieves." Master Chen stepped forward, blocking the sheriff's path. "You are mistaken, Sheriff." "I'm not mistaken about nothing, Chen. Vane wants his brides." "They are not Vane's brides," Chen said calmly. "They are Mistress Thorne and Mistress Thorne. They were married this morning. You are interrupting a family gathering." The sheriff sneered. "Married? To him? That gun shark? That ain't legal. You can't have two wives." Thorne stepped forward, the twins flanking him like guardian spirits. His hand rested on the butt of his gun. "In this valley, Sheriff, the law is what I say it is. And I say I'm a married man enjoying his Christmas. Now, unless you want to join those men in the snow," he gestured to the frozen corpses of the mercenaries that Chen's men had piled near the tree line. The sheriff looked at the bodies. He looked at the 20 armed guards of the Chen family. He looked at Thorne's eyes, which were colder than the blizzard that had passed. "Vane won't like this," the sheriff spat, turning his horse. "Tell Vane," Thorne called out, his voice ringing off the granite cliffs, "that if he comes to my house again, he won't be leaving." As the sheriff rode away, defeated, the tension in the yard finally broke. The twins turned to Thorne. For the first time, they smiled. It was a radiant, identical expression that seemed to melt the ice around Thorne's heart. "Husband," Mai said, testing the word. "Husband," Lin echoed. Master Chen signaled his men. They began unloading crates from the sleds, supplies, food, fine silks, and ammunition. "I will leave you to your winter," Chen said, climbing back into his carriage. "I will return in the spring when the pass clears. Do not let them die, Julian Thorne." "I won't," Thorne promised. As the caravan disappeared back into the white landscape, Thorne was left standing in the yard with his 2 new wives. The sun was high now, dazzlingly bright on the snow. "It is cold," Lin said, shivering slightly. "Then let's go inside," Thorne said. He ushered them back into the cabin. The fire was dying, so he stoked it until it roared. He watched them moving around his small, cramped space. They were already organizing, cleaning, making the space their own. They moved in perfect synchronization, communicating without words. Thorne sat in his chair, watching the flames. He had woken up a solitary man expecting a lonely Christmas. He was going to sleep a husband to 2 of the most beautiful, dangerous complications the frontier had ever produced. Later that evening, as the sun set behind the peaks, casting long purple shadows across the snow, Mai and Lin sat on the rug before the fire. They had found a needle and thread and were mending the tears in their pink prairie dresses. Thorne poured 3 cups of tea, a gift from the crates Chen had left. He handed a cup to Mai, then one to Lin. "Thank you," they said in unison. Thorne took a sip of the tea. It was bitter and hot, grounding him. "You know," he said quietly, "Vane will come back. This isn't over." Mai looked up, her eyes fierce. "We know." Lin threaded her needle, the steel flashing in the firelight. "But we are not alone anymore." "No," Thorne said, looking at his guns hanging by the door, and then at the women who now wore his name. "No, you're not." The blizzard had passed, but the world had changed. The gunslinger of Silver Creek had found something worth more than gold, and more dangerous than dynamite. He had found a family. And as the stars came out over the silent, snowy mountains, Julian Thorne realized that for the first time in his life, he was exactly where he was supposed to be. The months that followed were a testament to the strange, new reality of the cabin. The winter was harsh, refusing to release its grip on the mountains, but inside, there was warmth. Thorne taught the twins how to shoot. He discovered quickly that while they were identical in looks, they were distinct in skill. Ma had a steady hand and the patience of a sniper. She took to the rifle as if she had been born with it. Lynn was quicker, more reactive. She favored the revolver, practicing her draw until her speed rivaled Thorne's own. They, in turn, transformed his world. The grim, bachelor existence of the cabin vanished. The air, once smelling only of stale tobacco and gun oil, now carried the scents of spices and herbs they found in the provisions. They taught him the language of their father, the intricate politics of the railroad, and the philosophy of the East. But the threat of the tiger remained a shadow over their happiness. Spring arrived with the cracking of ice and the roar of the meltwater in the creek. With the thaw came the news Thorne had been expecting. A rider from the nearest mining town brought word Silas Vane was coming. He wasn't bringing lawmen this time. He was bringing a war party, 30 men, a Gatling gun, and a burning desire to reclaim his stolen property and punish the man who had humiliated him. Thorne watched the rider leave, then turned to his wives. They were standing on the porch, wearing practical buckskins they had sewn themselves, their pink dresses packed away in a cedar chest as a memory of a weaker time. 30 men, Thorne said. We have the high ground, Ma noted, scanning the ridge. We have the trap zones we prepared, Lynn added, checking the cylinder of her revolver. Thorne smiled, a rare expression that reached his eyes. And we have Christmas. Christmas? Lynn asked, confused. It is April. The surprise, Thorne clarified. We give them something they don't expect. 2 days later, Vane's posse rode into the valley. Silas Vane rode at the front, a massive man with a beard like iron wire. He halted his men at the edge of the clearing. Thorne! Vane roared. Send out the women, and I'll kill you quick. Make me come in there, and I'll peel the skin from your bones. Silence answered him. The cabin looked deserted. Burn it out! Vane ordered. As his men spurred their horses forward, the ground in front of them erupted. Thorne had buried dynamite, stolen from the mines years ago, under the snow-softened earth. The explosion shattered the charge, throwing horses and men into chaos. From the ridge above the cabin, the crack of a Winchester echoed. Ma lay prone in the rocks, firing with deadly precision. Every shot entered a saddle. Vane screamed orders, trying to rally his men, but they were caught in a crossfire. From the tree line, Lynn moved like a ghost, her revolvers barking. She didn't shoot to kill, she shot to cripple, hitting legs and shoulders, creating confusion and panic. Thorne stepped out from the shadow of the barn, a shotgun in his hands. He walked directly toward Vane, ignoring the chaos around him. Vane saw him and raised his pistol, but fear made his hand shake. This wasn't a rancher defending his home. This was a reaper. Thorne didn't fire. He walked up to Vane's horse, grabbed the bridle, and ripped the man from the saddle with one hand. Vane hit the mud with a wet thud. Before he could rise, Thorne's boot was on his chest, the shotgun pressed under his chin. I told your sheriff, Thorne said calmly, that if you came back, you wouldn't leave. The gunfire stopped. Vane's surviving mercenaries looked at their fallen leader, then at the 2 women who had materialized from the woods to stand beside Thorne. They looked at the identical faces, the smoking guns, and the cold determination. Please, Vane gasped. I'll leave. I'll sign whatever you want. Thorne looked at Ma and Lynn. It's your choice. Ma stepped forward. Go, she said. Tell the world that the daughters of Chen are not cattle to be traded. Lynn stepped up beside her sister. Tell them that if they come for the Thorne family, they should bring more men. Vane scrambled to his horse and fled, his shattered posse limping behind him. He never returned. The legend of the 2-headed dragon of Silver Creek spread across the west, a tale of a gunslinger and his twin warrior wives who held the pass against an army. Years later, the cabin had grown into a sprawling ranch. The railroad ran through the lower pass, paying a handsome toll to the Thorne family for protection. Master Chen visited every Christmas, bringing gifts of silk and jade. On one such Christmas, decades later, an old Julian Thorne sat on his porch, watching his grandchildren play in the snow. Mai and Lin sat on either side of him, their hair streaked with grey, but their hands still warm in his. "It is snowing again," Mai observed. "Just like that night," Lin said. Thorn reached into his pocket and pulled out a piece of fabric he had kept for 40 years, a scrap of lace from a light pink prairie dress. He looked at the mountains, wild and beautiful. "Best Christmas I ever had," he whispered. The sisters leaned their heads on his shoulders, identical in their love, identical in their peace. The shocking decision of a father had become the blessing of a lifetime, proving that sometimes, in the harsh math of the frontier, 1 + 2 equaled forever.